Greetings everyone, Jake Jeffries here. As you know, I am currently promoting a Kickstarter campaign for my latest urban fantasy supernatural horror novel about a vampire named Von Getsu, who is hell-bent on revenge against his maker. He is not a normal vampire. One of his unique abilities is the ability to control his blood as if each cell were a limb itself. I'll be reading from the beginning of the novel for this video. Chapter 1. The pain radiating from my face was excruciating. I could heal myself, but I willed myself not to. They had to think that I was more like them, weaker like them. A dozen vampires stood around me in an imperfect circle. The leader of the coven was taller than the rest, but still shorter than me. He stood around 6 foot tall. His stupid hair was shaved on one side and long enough to cover half of his face, with the swept style in which it was fashioned. The black boots he wore kept making clumping sounds on the floor, like a trotting horse as he paced back and forth in front of me. The sound echoed through the old warehouse. Blood stained his white t-shirt and blue jeans. My blood. I kept spitting it at him. Brass knuckles adorned his right hand. The crowd cheered him on while he beat me. My legs were chained to the legs of the steel chairs that they set me in. The chair was bolted to the floor. My hands were handcuffed behind me and ran through the bars that made up the back of the chair. My gear was taken and placed on a table behind me. "Franco, hit him again," one of the girls closest to us screamed. "Kill him! Kill him! Kill him!" The entire crowd started chanting and pumping their fists in the air to the rhythm. Franco grabbed a hold of my hair with his left hand and smiled. The right brass-knuckled hand he brought up into the air in preparation for another strike. Like a piston, he began speed punching me in the face. It hurt like hell, since it was his main area of concentration. He paused again. "Tell me, friend, why were you creeping around here? What is your game, man? Who are you?" I spit on his shirt around where his heart would be. "Game? No game, pal. Just trying to find out what I'm looking for. I'm not exactly anyone." "Trying to find what you're looking for. Well, what would that be, you creeper?" "A vampire. He answers to the name Matthias." Everyone in the room started laughing. "You're not looking for a vampire. You're looking for the vampire. Matthias rules us all, man. What do you want with the Don?" Franco asked as he finished chuckling. "Don? He's a Don now, is he? Where is his office? I'd like to make him an offer he can't refuse." Fresh blood filled my mouth and I spit it on his face. "Not the hair, man. What the hell is your problem anyway?" He began beating me in the face again, with more fury than before. Apparently he likes his hair. After a few minutes he paused again for breath. "The Don is untouchable, man. We wouldn't know how to reach him. We ain't seen him since the eve of his daughter's wedding. That's when he gave us this place. His daughter's a looker, too. Not that you'll ever know. Let's see, what was her name again?" The short man stepped out of the crowd. He was around 5 foot tall. "I think her name is Helena. It was Helena Blight. Now it's Helena Belmont," the short man said with a bit of angst in his voice. His small frame was shaking. "Thanks, Shorty. That's it. What are you shaking for?" "Franco, sir? I think I know who he is." "Really now? Well, who do you think he might be?" "He looks familiar, like the vampire Von Getsu Ocelot." The room grew silent. Everyone in the crowd took a step back. Franco's eyes went wide as he tried to piece together a puzzle that his mind couldn't quite comprehend. "Von Getsu is a myth. Matthias said that he has dealt with him personally. No one survives Matthias," he said flatly, like a fact that would be true as long as he voiced it out loud. I smiled and started laughing. My head fell back and blood dripped from my mouth. I willed my healing ability to start back up and my wounds started repairing themselves quickly. Blood flowed back into my body, pulling itself out of my clothing where it ran down my torso. My black shirt was no longer damp. The red stains on my denim jeans disappeared. Franco's brass knuckles fell from his hand as he stared at me in disbelief. The hamburger appearance of my face restructured itself back to normal. Helena Belmont. I had a daughter once. I had a family. Your Don killed them. It is only fitting that the favor be paid back in kind. Maybe I'll throw in a little interest. I popped the bones in my neck. The handcuffs still hung tightly about my wrist. I swung my arms in arcs above my head, snapping the cuffs off like they were made of glass. My legs were still inconveniently wrapped in chains. I stood up, turned around, and walked to the table for my things. The chains caused enough of a hindrance to feel as if I was walking in water before they finally snapped apart. Behind me, I heard the sound of rapid clicking. If they were smart, it'd be the sound of their shoes clacking against the ground in an effort to escape. If they were dumb, the more likely of scenarios, then they were checking to make sure that their guns were loaded and safety switched off. Gunfire echoed out into the empty warehouse. Bullets rained upon my back in a torrential downpour. I felt them as they dug into my flesh, tearing bits away and dragging bits with them into my softer tissues. I quickly grabbed my unsheathed twin swords from the table. Turning quickly, I started parrying the bullets from their trajectory. Unfortunately, I couldn't deflect them all, but I was able to deflect most of them. One managed to hit me right in the eye. It caused quite a bit of discomfort as it went through my brain and exited out of the back of my head. It was a hollow point as well, which caused even more damage. The barrage of bullets stopped. They needed to reload. One of the male vampires started charging at me. He was wearing my sunglasses. They were Revo Square Classics with orange lenses. His hair was dyed a bright red shade. The shirt he was wearing was white and had a brooding-looking teenager in a Dracula costume holding a sign reading, "Will sparkle for food." He ran too close to one of the nearby machines and one of the chains dangling from his black pants caught and tripped him up. "Damn it!" he exclaimed as he rolled head over heels until he was resting at my feet. "Double damn it!" I smiled down at him. "It seems fate has decided to be unkind to you, my friend." The path of destruction through my brain healed itself. A new eye popped itself into place. I took the sword in my left hand and plunged it through the vamp's heart until it was lodged in the ground. His body started to burn and turn to ash. My sunglasses were still on his face. I bent down, picked them up, and put them on. The overhead lights in the building were brighter than I thought. The glasses helped me see much better. Franco stood across from the room from me with wide eyes. "Hey Franco, looks like you have a little bit of blood on your shirt." "What?" Franco looked down puzzled. I inserted a bit of my will and clenched my left fist. The blood on Franco's shirt started to eat a hole through the fabric. It continued burning a hole, slowly eating away at his skin like acid. The blood is an extension of myself and can eat through anything. It would be possible to use it to consume his heart more quickly, but I willed it to go slower, so that way he could savor the pain and relish in it. His screaming was blood-curdling. He turned his gun on himself, aimed at his heart, and took his own life instead of letting me finish. An ash pile formed on the ground. "Really? I hate when you idiots don't let me finish having my fun. What is wrong with you? Oh well. 2 down and 10 to go." The remaining 10 vampires just stared at me. They stood frozen in place for a few seconds, then looked at each other. Shorty stood in place, while the other 9 bolted for the door. I flash-stepped to the door. There wasn't one vampire in the group as fast as me. The 9 stopped in their tracks. One of the female vampires stood about 5 yards away. I threw the sword into her chest, striking her in the heart. She began to burn. I ran and grabbed the sword from her chest and kept going until I got to the next person. and slashed them in half, bringing the sword through their heart in a wide arc. His top half began to slide off the bottom half of his body, but he completely turned into ashes before he hit the ground. The 7 remaining idiots lifted their guns and began firing again. I deflected their bullets the same as before, only this time I began to send them back in their direction. The vampires screamed as they were getting torn apart by their own bullets coming back at them. I managed to hit 5 of them in the heart, causing them to begin deteriorating. Vampires could solve a lot of their own problems if they would wear bulletproof vests or bore some type of armor to protect their vulnerable muscle from being punctured. There were 2 of them left, and they had stopped firing. A noise erupted from my stomach. It was complaining about my expenditure of energy from fighting and healing without having had anything to eat for quite some time. I took the sword and stabbed it into my stomach. Blood started to trickle out of the wound. It wasn't enough, so I wiggled the sword around a bit to make the wound larger, causing the blood to gush out at a much faster pace. It began to pool on the floor. The 2 vampires stared at me in confusion. The blood started to quiver and took a different form after I exerted a bit of my will into it. The form of a snake should do. I sent the crimson snake slithering toward the last male vampire that stood against me. His female companion stood frozen in shock. The blood python wrapped itself around his victim and slithered into his open mouth. Once inside him, I began the feeding process. How does it feel to be eaten alive? Each cell in my body can attack any other living cells and consume them. Thus the need to cut myself so that I could use my blood as a weapon. I crossed my arms in front of my chest. He opened his mouth in an attempt to speak, but failed. Instead, blood started running out of it. Tears of blood started to run down his cheeks, and more blood trickled out of his ears and nose. His eyes began to dissolve and his skin became translucent. Veins could not be seen, just the color of red underneath the dissolving skin. I turned to his companion and smirked. He looks better in red. You're a monster, she squealed. Come on, lady. What do you think you are, for crying out loud? I don't feed on my own people. Duh. Because you can't, or it would more than likely kill you. The reason I can is because not only am I part human and part vampire, I'm part Reaper as well. Reaper? Yeah, the beings responsible for taking care of everything after death. How on earth did that happen? After I was turned, a Reaper came to me and gave me additional powers so that I could feed on vampires as well as humans. I presume it was to restore some kind of balance and order to things so that I could help keep down your population. Order is important, after all. The vampire I was consuming was nothing more than a humanoid-shaped sack of blood by this point. I finished him off by consuming the skin. A large puddle of blood remained. I wheeled it into the air and threw it at the female vampire. She screamed, but no sound came out. The blood began to feed on her from the outside in. In a matter of about a minute, only 2 piles of clothes remained. I walked over to the puddle of blood, stood in the middle of it, and wheeled it all back inside my body. It ran up my legs and went back into the hole in my stomach it came out of. The sword began to force its way back out on its own, but I yanked it out the rest of the way. Shorty still stood where he was standing before. He stared bug-eyed at me, quietly. In the corner of my eye, I saw another man standing in a dark corner with thread in his hands. He kept forming different figures, such as a cat's cradle and 7 stars. He wore Egyptian-style clothing. A shindite, made out of a fine material, covered his lower body. He wore no shoes or shirt. A wide gorge ring was worn about his neck, with blue anklets, armlets, and armbands. The weirdest part about him was that he had the head of an ibis. "Hey you, what are you doing?" Shorty answered, Nothing, just standing here. Please don't kill me." The man with the ibis head snapped his attention forward and stared intently at me for a moment. I looked at Shorty and gestured to the corner of my sword, with my sword. Not you, idiot. The man in the corner behind you. The man exploded. Not a fiery or a bloody explosion. He exploded into what looked like strands of hair or pieces of thread. Shorty looked over his shoulder. Who was it you saw? His voice still had a detectable quiver. There was a man there, dressed like an Egyptian with the head of an ibis. I flash-stepped over to where the man was standing. A slight breeze wafted through the area, and some of the strands started to blow away. I bent down and picked them up. It was definitely some kind of thread. The man exploded into small pieces of thread. Shorty gave me a peculiar look. Von Getsu, sir? People don't explode into thread, nor do they usually have the head of an ibis. Are you feeling okay? I'm feeling fine. Come see for yourself. Do you have a name, or should I just call you Shorty? Shorty's fine, sir. Are you going to kill me? That depends. Are you going to make me kill you? Shorty thought about something for a moment, then warily walked over to where I was knelt down. See? It's a pile of threads. I handed him the piece I was holding. He took it from my hand. You're not kidding. It is very odd that a pile of threads would be here. I don't remember seeing anything like it here before. The man kept forming different figures with some kind of yarn or thread in his hands. There's no telling who or even what he is. I grabbed a handful of threads and placed them in my pocket of my blue jeans. A soft meow came from the direction of the entrance of the building. Shorty? What was that? Don't know, sir. I let my attention drift from the threads and towards the doorway I was dragged through earlier in the night. A little gray and white kitten was meandering about. It was searching the ground intently, presumably looking for some kind of food to eat. Did you lot have a cat? No, we did not. Are you going to kill it? Shorty glanced quickly between me and the cat. I gave him a puzzled look. Kill it? What is wrong with you? Do you think I'm a monster? The myth of Von Getsu is the urban legend most vampires tell when they talk about things they fear. He shrugged his shoulders. I just assumed that if you were such a nightmare to vampires, then there was nothing safe from you. I snapped my fingers and pointed at him. The sooner you get this straight, Shorty, the sooner you will get to understand me better. I think of myself as a hero to the innocent, a protector of all that is good. And if that makes me a nightmare to vampires or the like, then so be it. Leaving my sword behind on the floor, I stood up and walked over to the little kitten. It stopped meandering and looked at me. The poor little guy had one eye. There wasn't really much around here to eat that a cat would like. I knelt down and scratched under his chin. The kitten purred with excitement from the attention. Are you hungry, little guy? The kitten continued to purr and rub against my hand. I picked it up, checked its gender, then held him in my arm. So you're a he. But you don't have a name, huh? Let's see. I got it. Since you only have the solo eye, I'm going to call you Odin. An inflated sigh came from behind me. You're naming him Odin? Really? I rolled my eyes. It's better than Shorty. Why, what would you call him? Shut up. You're the one that gave me that name, too. I'd probably just call him Cat. My fingers shot up to where my nose met my forehead and then massaged the area between my eyes. You know, you're not making a very good case for me not killing you. Make yourself useful and tell me where to find Helena. He shrugged his shoulders. You can't. She's double royalty. The Blight family and the Belmont family have been around since the first Vamps. I'd start with Blood at the Bat Bar, though. Matthews owns that little niche. It's in an alley off of 4th Street. The password to get in is bitten by bat, bound by blood. Is there any particular person in there that knows anything? Von Getsu, you're resourceful. If you can't get any answers, then kill everyone and burn the place down. At the very least, it'll get you noticed. True. Thanks, Shorty. I think I'll let you live. For now. Don't get back on my radar and there won't be a problem. Shorty waved and exited the building. My other gear was still on the table beside the chair where I was held captive. I made my way over to it, picking my swords up along the way, and placed Odin on the table next to my duster. It was an oldie but a goodie given to me by a man without a name when I traveled through Mexico many years ago. I had 2 old revolvers given to me by the same man. The 2 swords I had, one from a samurai years before that. I put them back in their sheaths. I fastened the sheaths and holster in place. The holster held 2 revolvers on the same side. I wrapped the duster around my frame and slid my arms through the sleeves. My slouch hat was the last item I returned to its resting place atop my head. Odin meowed in approval. He jumped into my arms and we headed off into the night. Chapter 2. A dark alley branched off of 4th Street like a vein. Dumpsters and trash littered the ground as if mimicking a blocked artery. A single light illuminated the door in the center of the alley on the wall to the left of me. The sound of my footsteps reverberated off the walls. The wind howled through the narrow alleyway, causing my duster to billow behind me. The moonlight glistened off my revolvers and off the hilts of my swords, safely tucked away in their sheath and holster. I stopped at the door, taking a moment to glance at my elongated shadow, made longer by the slouch hat that I wore. There is no sign or form of identification on the door, just a single light and graffiti adorning the walls surrounding it. A giant bat symbol was painted in red above the door, with blood of the bat written beneath it. Okay, Odin. You're going to stay out here while I go see about some business. We'll get you something to eat afterwards. I sat Odin down on the ground. He let out a bored meow, walked in a circle, and laid down, resting his head upon his paws. Turning my attention back to the door, I raised my right hand and knocked 3 times. The small window in the door opened to reveal a pair of eyes with glowing red irises. What is the password? A gruff voice, a very slow enunciation, asked from behind the door. Bitten by bat, bound by blood, I replied with a nod. That is correct. Hold on a moment. The window slid shut, followed by the sound of several clicks as the man unlocked the door. He opened it and gestured inside towards the bar. Sit where you would like, he said, and his eyes narrowed as they looked me up and down. I tipped my hat at him in response and started to make my way across the room. The walls were painted black, with groups of flying bats painted in red and what looked to be random patterns. The floor was blood red. The bar and tables were also painted black. There were red lights placed on each table and red lights shining from behind the bar. Bottles of what appeared to be blood and alcohol lined the shelves and cabinets. A group of 6 male vampires were playing poker at a table to the left. A vampire couple was on a date to the right. Towards the back and to the right, there was a table of 4 male vampires, each with 2 human female escorts. The smell of their blood was thick in the air, almost suffocating. 2 out of the 8 escorts were AB negative blood type, which is fairly rare. One of the others had the stench of sickle cell anemia. I could sense how narrow her blood vessels were. No doubt she would eventually have a stroke and die of a cerebral hemorrhage. There was one more slick-haired vampire sitting at the right side of the bar alone, and the bartender was standing behind the bar, washing a glass. I sat down in the middle of the bar, took off my hat and sunglasses, and began listening to my surroundings. It was hard to clearly understand the group off to my right because the jukebox was playing Bad Moon Rising as loud as it would go. Overheard one of the male vampires mention Matthias when the bartender finally came up to me and interrupted my train of thought. The bartender shrugged his shoulders. "What can I get you?" "Huh?" I replied, snapping out of my concentration. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Oh, yeah, I'll have a Bloody Jack. Better yet, I'll have 3. He cocked an eyebrow, stared at me with piercing red eyes as if waiting on something. Then it hit me. "Right. Here you go, keep the change." I pulled a small pouch containing the silver pieces out of my duster and threw it on the bar. He picked it up and opened it. After examining the contents for a few seconds, he nodded and closed the pouch. "That will do just fine. Might I ask your name, stranger?" "Does it matter?" "No, I'm just trying to make conversation." "Well, it isn't necessary." The bartender grunted, grabbed 3 glasses and 2 bottles. One was a black bottle of Jack Daniels and the other just had a sticker of a black bat on it and contained the necessary ingredient for any vampire mixed drink: blood. He set the glasses down in front of me and starting on opposite ends, began to pour the liquids into the glasses, crossing in the middle so that each glass contained about 2/3 blood and 1/3 whiskey. I wrapped both hands around the glass and drank them both quickly. I wrapped my left hand around the 3rd glass and waited for the effects of the first 2 to kick in. Slowly I began to feel the effects of the drinks in my system. "You're sure knocking those back pretty quick. You got some demons you're running from?" the bartender asked. "On the contrary, there's a demon that I'm chasing." "This demon have a name?" I knocked back the last Bloody Jack. "You familiar with the demon known as Matthias Blight? I'd also take any information about Helena Belmont." The bartender's eyes bugged out, and he grabbed for something underneath the counter. He brought up a double-barreled shotgun and aimed it at me. The slick-haired vampire at the bar jumped up from his stool and pointed a handgun at me as well. He must be the bodyguard sent with the group to protect them, or another bouncer for the bar, possibly both. "Well, I suppose it's too late to try the subtle approach, isn't it?" I asked rhetorically. I raised my hands up, tried to look as innocent as I could. Slowly I stood up from the stool. "Do you not know Don Blight owns this bar? You had to be suicidal to walk in here and make threats against the boss, and furthermore, how dare you bear arms against your fellow kind?" The bartender twitched with anticipation after his rant. "Would you rather me put my arms down?" Perhaps I could explain myself. "Lower them slowly and explain." The bartender gestured downward with the shotgun. I lowered my hands slowly and put them into the front pockets of my black pants. "Matthias is the vampire that turned me. He also murdered my family in front of me." The bartender shook his head. "They were just collateral damage for the rise of our leader." The door guard decided to make his way over and stand behind me. There were 23 people in here other than me. The slick-haired vampire to my right, pointing the handgun at me, decided it was time for him to speak. "Oh, boo-hoo. You should feel blessed that you were turned by the dawn. He gave you the gift of immortality, you ungrateful piece of shit. Your family is dead. There is nothing you can do to change that. Get over and forget them already. They died providing nourishment for a cause greater than them. Slick, you should know that I would gladly trade immortality for the lives of my family. I'm glad you feel so strongly about the cause because you've just become a martyr for it. Excuse me?" In a simultaneous movement, I flash-stepped towards Slick with my right hand, drew the revolver from its holster. I placed the barrel to rest beneath his chin. I could not contain my anger. My right eye grew wide, and my left eye twitched with the anticipation of pulling the trigger. His surprised, frightened eyes stared at me in disbelief. I sneered at him and fired a bullet upwards through his head. The bullet exited with a trail of blood and brains in its wake. I pointed the revolver at his chest and fired another shot through his heart. His body flashed orange and turned to ash. The human women screamed. The vampire couple ran for the door and began unlocking it. With my left hand, I drew my other revolver and fired 2 shots through each of their hearts. From behind, and they too glowed orange and dissipated into ash. I heard the sound of the shotgun firing and turned in time to catch both shots with the left side of my face. Pain shot through me as the buckshot tore through my flesh. The pellets continued through, dragging flesh, blood and bone with them. I couldn't see through my left eye, seeing as it was destroyed with the blast as well. With my good eye, I noticed the door guard drawing a pistol out of his coat. He took aim and fired straight through my heart. The pain was now almost unbearable. Blood poured out through the gaping hole in my chest and flowed down my black shirt. I fell to my knees and let my arms drop to my sides. Blood was flowing steadily from my head and chest now. I allowed it to. Why isn't he dying? The bartender asked. You shot him in the heart. I don't know. What is he? The door guard replied, this time with a quiver detectable in his gruff tone. I stared at the door guard and licked my lips where there was flesh missing. My pool of blood was now just short of touching the door guard's foot. I raised my right arm and fired a shot into the bartender's chest. He glowed and turned to ash. The door guard was standing directly in the pool of my blood now. I willed my blood upwards and onto him. It crept up his body like vines. He screamed and emptied the rest of his clip into my chest. I willed my blood into his mouth, suffocating him. His face twisted in horror with a silent scream. I raised my hand and clenched my fist. Devour. My blood began to consume him like a century's worth of decomposition rolled into 1 minute. The gun fell from his hand. His clothes started to fold in on themselves. Once he was no more, I willed my blood back into me. My body began to regenerate quickly. I turned to where my left side was, facing the male vampires with the entourage of human women, and fired a shot into each of their hearts. They too glowed and turned to ash. The women screamed again now that their so-called protectors were laid to rest. They all huddled together behind the table. The remaining 6 vampires in the room stood up and started to rush at me. I raised my right arm and fired 3 shots into the hearts of 3 of them. My revolver clicked empty after 3 shots. I turned and brought my left revolver to face them, and it too clicked empty upon attempting to fire. I spun the revolvers around my fingers and stuck them back into their holster. Using my right hand, I grasped the hilt of the sword on my left side. I flash-stepped out of the path of the oncoming vampires trying to attack me. At the end of my flash step, I unsheathed the sword and swung it in an arc, cutting through the middle of all 3 vampires. Their top halves slid slowly off of their lower halves. The sword cut through their hearts, ending them all at once. They glowed, and then the 6 halves turned to ash. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a rag to clean the blade. After wiping the blade clean, I sheathed it and placed the rag back into my pocket. I whipped out the revolver from my left side and swung out the cylinder. After ejecting the cartridges, I reloaded it using one of the loaded speed loaders from my duster pocket. I closed the cylinder, spun the revolver on one finger, and holstered it. I whipped out my other revolver and repeated the reloading process. The human women were staring at me in horror. "You lot are free to go." I jerked my head towards the exit. They bolted for the door. I grabbed the sick one by the arm before she got past. Excuse me, sweetheart. I have a sixth sense when it comes to blood. You don't have much longer left from what I can tell. I'm sure you already knew that you have sickle cell anemia. Go get help, or at least enjoy your life to its fullest until your time is up. Take this, the money from the register and the pouch of silver on the bar. I handed her a pouch full of gold pieces. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. She took the pouch and made her way behind the bar to retrieve the other pouch and the cash from the drawer. I turned around and the other women had already run out the door. I walked over to the bar, grabbed my hat and sunglasses, and put them back on. It occurs to me that Matthias may have some confusion about who may have crashed this bar. I should leave him a note just in case. The inside pocket of my duster holds 3 large nails that were used to crucify Christ. I pull one of them out and carve a V into the bar. The nail is imbued with a residual holy energy from the blood that stained it. It draws attention to itself, even to someone that isn't supernatural. How can you hate vampires so much if you were a vampire? The remaining woman asked. I might ask you the same about humans. Touché. I made my way to the door, and just before I exited the building, the sick woman called out to me. Hey, what's your name? Von Getsu. We waved at each other and went our separate ways. Odin got up and began to follow me. Matthias would be in touch now. Now it's time to wait. The confrontation is drawing near. I can feel it in my bones. So, thanks for checking out my Kickstarter. And please check out the rewards and you can pledge whatever you like.